In this video, we'll be taking a look at State of Daniel's video titled Proof of God is Inside You, Does God Exist? And addressing some of the points made in it. Let's get right to it.
Hey YouTube, what's going on?
Not much, just making some response videos.
Today, I want to talk about proof of God's existence. And the reason I'm talking about that is because I was reading your comments, the comments you guys have left on my videos, and have noticed a theme. And the theme is a complaint that I haven't provided proof of God's existence, which is sort of funny because if you watch my videos, then you know I've provided countless theological and philosophical arguments for the existence of God.
Perhaps they wanted stronger proofs, an issue I'm sure you will rectify now.
But anyways, here we are, and today I want to talk about the proof of God that resides inside of you, that is inside of each and every one of us. But before I talk about that, I do want to go on a tangent.
Please don't.
Because I think it's funny that people even ask me to provide proof of God in the first place. Because if you think about it, the proof of God is all around us. Look around you, whether you're at home, work, school, a coffee shop. The fact that you are here, that we are here, the fact that there are people around you, that we live in a world that sustains life, that provides everything you need to live, such as food, water, oxygen, proteins, nutrients, whatever. The fact that our earth sustains life and is designed to do so, I think is great proof of God's existence.
Okay, I'm gonna have to stop you there. Just saying look around, everything is proof for God is not actually proof for God. You actually have to demonstrate the existence of a God and how it does the things you are claiming it has done. There are plenty of naturalistic models regarding why everything is the way it is, and even if we can't explain it, that doesn't mean God becomes the right answer by default. Also, claiming that the Earth is designed as evidence of God's existence begins with accepting the premise that the Earth is designed, and then uses that to claim God designed it. That is an example of circular reasoning, where the conclusion is supported by premises which are supported by the conclusion. You have to prove God exists, and then you can move on to proving what the God did or did not design.
Because if you think about it, no, seriously, if you think about it, atheists believe in evolution. Or actually, let me clarify, atheists believe in evolution without God.
Atheists don't necessarily believe in evolution. An atheist is just someone who doesn't have a belief in a god or gods. Granted, most of them do believe in evolution, but don't worry about it, go on.
So they believe that in the beginning there was nothing, and out of this nothing came something, energy and heat that coalesced together to create a great ball of energy, which was so heated that it exploded in a Big Bang across the universe, spitting out stars and planets and galaxies. And somehow, out of the millions of light years that is the expanse of the junkyard in space, the right atoms came together with protein and water to create cells, the first life form, which are apparently the great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers of everything that exists on Earth. These few cells of living matter were responsible for creating everything as we know it today, for the trees, poison ivy, dolphins, dogs, grasshoppers, koala bears, and yes, even us humans, which, by the way, we have brains that are more complex than even the most advanced supercomputers in the world.
Okay, so that wasn't just evolution. You threw the Big Bang and abiogenesis in there, but whatever, it's not a huge issue. You neglected to mention the fact that it took almost 14 billion years to reach the current point, and billions of planets that can't sustain life. Also, it doesn't matter how complex it sounds, if the evidence supports the theory, then you need to present alternate evidence to argue against it. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Honestly, all of this is moot, you still need to prove God did it. So far, none of this is proving God exists. Secondly, human brains aren't overly unique. Yes, they are very impressive, but if you compare them to other animal species, we share a great deal of architecture within the brain, so to speak. We fit into the animal kingdom quite well. The human brain is not so different to all other brains that we can't assert we are also animals. Also, to our brains being more complex than supercomputers, yes, at this point in time, the human brain is more complex than anything it has been able to construct. But it stands to reason that if we could easily design supercomputers more complex than ourselves, then we would probably require more complex brains to do so. I will simply refer to Ian Stewart's popular quote, "If our brains were simple enough for us to understand them, they would be so simple we couldn't."
So long story short, atheists believe that somehow after the Big Bang, the universe created animate matter out of inanimate matter, and somehow out of that, consciousness arose from unconsciousness. And they believe that this all happened without God.
As much as it sounds really complex, that doesn't mean it can't be accounted for. There are plenty of models explaining many processes that we once thought to be unexplainable. Yes, there is no current consensus on abiogenesis, and no scientist worth his microscope is asserting we have one. And even if we never learn what caused it, so what? Again, God does not become the default answer because it can't be explained. That would be an argument from ignorance fallacy. Also, modern neuroscience has shown us that consciousness is an emergent property of the physical structures of the brain. It's actually really fascinating and would be worth you looking up. It's not nearly as hard a problem to solve as abiogenesis, but you still actually haven't made an argument for God's existence, so let's keep moving.
Don't get mad at me, I'm just pointing out the obvious.
I'm not mad, you're fine. In fact, you haven't really made any form of argument yet, so let's keep going.
But the point I want to make with that is that the earth clearly supports life. It was designed to do so. There is clearly design in the universe. Things work a certain way. And where there's design, there is always a creator.
Okay, here we go. You realize the large majority of the Earth's surface does not support human life. You realize every other part of the universe we have observed so far doesn't support life. Just saying there is clearly design is not actually proof that there is design. This is an example of a fallacy called argument by assertion, which is where someone tries to argue a point by merely asserting that it is true. Evidence, please. So regarding where there is design, there is always a creator. I don't even have to address that because you haven't actually proven there is design, but I will address it because, content. If you pour sand from a bucket into a pile, that pile will naturally make a pyramid shape. Does that mean the sand pile is designed, or is it just an emergent property of natural laws?
But anyways, that was my tangent. That the proof of God really is all around us.
Well, you didn't actually do anything. You just pointed out the universe is complex and then just asserted God. I hope you have some more substantial evidence coming up.
And now I want to get to the topic of today's video, which is the proof of God that is inside of you and inside of me. And I know that sounds sort of new agey, but I think it's biblical and I think it's true, obviously, or else I wouldn't be making a video on it.
Okay, here comes the evidence. Let's hear it. By the way, he's about to tell a story. We're going to let him tell the whole thing. It's about a minute long, so just bear with it.
And to illustrate that, I want to tell you a story. And it's a story of when I was at work. We had this client that paid us a ton of money, and it was nearing the end of the quarter. And so my manager asked me to create a quarterly report to showcase all of the work that we had done for this client. Now, when I started looking at the numbers were kind of bad. The work that we had done either wasn't working or maybe it was just a slow time of the year. But regardless, the numbers were clearly going downhill. And when I showed the report, the draft of the report to my manager, she asked me to start fandangling the numbers or to leave certain numbers out. Basically, she wanted to showcase the report in such a way that made it look like we were doing a great job, which, yes, we were doing good work, but the results weren't that great. And I told her, I'm not comfortable doing that. And I told her that she would be better off finding someone else in the office to handle that report because that was something I wouldn't want to do, which leads me to the proof of God. The reason I couldn't do what my manager asked and the reason that it became such an issue is because I have a conscience, and my conscience was telling me that, hey, it's not right to do that. It's not right to lie to a client who is paying all this money for your services. You have to be transparent. It's business, but still, honesty matters.
Okay, so this is getting dangerously close to you doing what you did before, which was telling a story and then just asserting God at the end. Don't do it.
The reality is that you have a conscience, I have a conscience, we all have a conscience. And I think that is the greatest proof that God exists.
You did it. I told you not to. I trusted you.
But first, let me define what I mean by conscience. Conscience isn't just a feeling that we did something wrong. Because, I can have a feeling that I toasted my grilled cheese too long this morning. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong. That's just a feeling. When I talk about conscience, I'm talking about the knowledge of right and wrong. And we all have a conscience, even non-believers, atheists, people of other religions. Everyone has a conscience. I think that a conscience is sort of like a compass. It guides us in the right direction in life. And like a compass, I think that our conscience can also sometimes be broken. It can need fine-tuning the farther we are away from God.
An atheist is probably the furthest you can get away from God. And if what you said was the case, we would see higher violent crime rates in countries with high atheist populations, which we don't see, or at least atheists disproportionately in the prison population, which we don't see. Also, not everyone has the same conscience. We see different ideas of right and wrong among different cultures, and some people are born without a conscience altogether. Sociopaths can be born into religious or secular households equally, and are characteristic of an individual whose antisocial behavior stems from a lack of moral responsibility or social conscience. It seems if conscience had divine origins, then it would be more consistent and less subject to interpretation and change.
But it doesn't just end there. We all not only have a conscience, but we also have an obligation to our conscience. We are obligated to follow it. That doesn't mean that we always follow it, but we always are driven to do what our conscience tells us to do. It's very difficult for us to disobey our conscience. And if you think about it, if you reflect, I am sure that you will find that your conscience has had an authority over you, that you have done something or not done something because your conscience has told you to.
Conscience provides an intuitive emotional response to perceived outcomes of our actions. When my conscience tells me stealing is wrong because people don't like the possessions being taken away from them, I am influenced by an emotional response which indicates this action will have a negative outcome. While we may interpret this as an obligation, it is in fact internally determined and subject to change with experience. If it was truly an absolute authority as dictated by divine origin, it would not be subject to change as a result of a person's actions.
Which is interesting because we live in an age where we rebel against authority. We don't listen to the police, we don't listen to the government, we like to protest. And despite all of this rebellion, we still find that our own conscience has authority over us, that we are committed, that above all else, we are committed to what we know to be true. So, as Peter Kreeft says, I think that conscience is great proof of God. Number one, we all have a conscience. Number two, it has authority over us. We are obligated to it.
Conscience is an internal thing, whereas the government is an external thing, so it is possible someone could rebel against the government because of their conscience, hence comparing the two is a false equivalence. Also, you haven't connected conscience to God. I'm really hoping you aren't just going to be asserting this without evidence. Seriously, here is the structure of your argument. 1. We have a conscience. 2. That conscience has authority over us. 3. God. You must see that to anybody looking at this from an outside perspective, it makes no sense and is not very convincing.
Now, there are really four main objections to the argument of God from conscience. The first argument that you might have is that conscience isn't really a thing. Conscience is something that's abstract. It's more of an idea. The problem with that is that if you agree with the premise that we're bound to our conscience, that our conscience has authority over us, well, it's not possible to be obligated to something that's abstract, such as an idea. If it's an idea, though, where does it get its authority from? Because an idea doesn't have authority. An idea can't hold authority over the person who has it, let alone everyone else around him.
Let's say we do agree with the idea that conscience has a level of authority. If an argument can be made that it is only an abstract idea, then we would simply have to find a new term to describe the effects or mechanisms of conscience, which are simply motivation towards particular actions based on an emotional response to perceived outcomes. As mentioned previously, conscience is an internal mechanism which influences a person's actions and is different to an idea. So for once I find myself agreeing with you on this point. However, I'm still waiting for you to show us how this links to God.
Number two, the second argument is that conscience is just a biological or an animalistic instinct. Sam Harris wrote a book a while back trying to explain it in this way, talking about our moral compass and how it's really biological and that it's an evolution-driven thing.
Yes, it's called The Moral Landscape. It's actually a really good book and it makes some very strong points. It would be worth you actually reading it.
The only problem with that is that we are bound to our conscience. For example, when you go against your conscience, you feel guilty. But on the other hand, we ignore our biological and animalistic instincts all the time. For example, I was hungry this morning. I had the instinct to eat, but I didn't because I'm on a diet and I'm trying to lose some weight. Our biological instincts aren't absolute, unlike conscience, which has authority over us.
So you can go against your conscience, hence you can do things that you know are wrong, but do them anyway for personal gain. It's actually not that uncommon. Though I just noticed a huge mess up here. You assert that if you go against your conscience, you feel bad, but you can go against other biological instincts, and used the example of feeling hungry but not eating. Wouldn't ignoring hunger and feeling hungry be synonymous with ignoring conscience and feeling guilty? That is literally the worst analogy you could make. But again, even if conscience is binding, how does this prove God? You still have to link it to God.
Conscience can't just simply be a biological thing because, as I just pointed out, we have a hard time disobeying our conscience. Our conscience has authority over us in a way that biological instincts don't.
You previously stated before that we can go against our conscience and the only negative outcome is we feel bad. I'm not going to argue the biological aspects of why we feel bad, but if you look into it, it's easy to see that it is simply a biological response to stimuli. So I don't see the separation between going against your conscience or ignoring a desire to eat or sleep. In fact, it is easy to argue the effects of not eating or sleeping are far greater than ignoring your conscience. So does that make hunger an authority as well? Try not eating or sleeping ever again. I'm going to bet you can't beat that biological instinct for a particularly long time. Biological instincts come in many different forms and affect our lives differently. So to just create a false equivalence between them all just shows you haven't really thought this through.
The third argument against it is that conscience is really only groupthink, that it originates from society. The problem with that is that if it originates from society, think about what society is. Society is basically a group of people like you and me. So what authority do they have over me? What authority does society have over you as far as morality goes? Must we never disobey society? The German society committed the Holocaust. So does that mean that they were right in doing so? To say that society is the root of conscience or the root of morality, that would be like saying you could put a bunch of prisoners in a jail and then because conscience comes from society, and you have a society in the jail that those prisoners are now the judge. So no, conscience does not come from society.
This is actually an interesting topic. A great deal of research shows that social pressures do highly influence our perception of right and wrong. If conscience was as absolute as you're asserting it is, it doesn't make much sense that for a great portion of human history, slavery was deemed acceptable by many societies. Society clearly does have an influencing factor on how morality is perceived, but it isn't the sole driver, and I don't think many people are actually arguing that position seriously. However, as a side note, all you need to do is read the Bible to see how perceptions of morality have changed with societies over time. But again, you haven't linked anything to God. I just realized you're probably going to say these explanations don't work and then just say it has to be God. Please don't do that, that would be terrible.
And the fourth argument is that conscience comes from something greater than you but isn't quite God. But as I just talked about, it's obviously not society. It's not even biological instinct. So really, when all the candidates are taken out, I think that leaves room for God. Not necessarily the Christian God, but just the idea of God in general.
Okay, so basically the grand finale of this video is an argument from ignorance fallacy. The claim is that we can't explain conscience with these other methods, so God is an acceptable answer. By the way, you did a terrible job of arguing against the other explanations, as I think we have outlined. But even if it can't be explained, that doesn't mean you can just interject with God. You actually have to prove the existence of the God, and then the mechanisms as to how it does what you were claiming it can do. Literally in any other mode of discourse, this would be unacceptable. Look, I'll show you. My dog got out and I have no idea where it is. It's on Mars. What? That's stupid. Do you know where it is? No. Then it's on Mars, as you can't explain where else it is. You can't seriously think that that style of arguing can actually prove something.
To sum up the argument, it's basically that we all have a conscience, and that conscience has absolute authority over us. We might not always obey it, but we're bound to it. We feel guilty when we disobey it, and the only way that we can all have that instilled of us is through some greater, perfect, good, and all-loving being, which is God. In other words, conscience is the voice of the will of God.
You literally didn't even attempt to prove that God exists. You claim the origins of the universe and life are complex, and then just threw God in there because it's complex. Then you give a crude explanation of conscience, crudely listed some ways that they're explained, and then rejected them for poor reasons, and then said, well, because these arguments don't work, I guess God fits. That's not how proving something works, Daniel. You can't just mix in appeals to ignorance and arguments from assertion and call it proof for God. You need to actually find observable ways to demonstrate the existence of the God and how it manifests in reality. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you have a video you want us to do a breakdown of, let us know. Subscribe to our channel for weekly videos, like this video and share it around to help us raise the bar of public discourse.